everyone. Let me start with a story, perhaps a familiar one. Picture Sarah. Growing up, like many of us, she loved Sunday school. She knew the stories, Adam and Eve in the perfect garden, Noah building his massive ark, the dramatic scene at the Tower of Babel, where languages were suddenly confused. These stories felt foundational, part of her identity. But for Sarah, they remained just that, stories. Vivid, maybe meaningful, but often presented simply, perhaps with flannel graphs or cartoons. No one really sat down with her to explore the deeper historical context, the potential scientific connections, or the profound implications these accounts had for understanding the real world we live in. Then came college. In her first anthropology lecture, she encountered theories of human origins stretching back millions of years, backed by genetic data and models of slow migration. In linguistics, she learned about the gradual divergence of language families over vast timescales. Suddenly, those familiar Sunday school stories felt fragile, maybe even naive, like childhood tales standing against what seemed like an overwhelming tide of academic evidence. The question started gnawing at her. Was the garden real history? Did the flood actually cover the globe? Did people and languages truly rapidly disperse after Babel? Because no one had ever equipped her to see these biblical accounts as historically grounded, scientifically plausible events offering deeper meaning and understanding, Sarah felt lost. The faith that felt so secure in childhood now seemed incompatible with her education. As is written in Psalms, quote, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands," Psalms 19:1. But for Sarah, and many like her, the connection between God's word and God's world felt broken. Sarah's experience, unfortunately, is not unique. I believe it highlights a critical gap that many young people face. They often leave home with a faith built on stories, perceived primarily as allegorical or mythical, unprepared for a world that demands evidence and coherence. They haven't been shown how the early chapters of Genesis can provide a powerful, logical framework for understanding the key aspects of human history and the world we observe all around us. They haven't been guided to see how the Bible's claims of historical accuracy can be investigated and found surprisingly consistent with the evidence. My goal in this presentation, based on my research, is to help bridge that very gap. I want to explore with you the compelling case that the foundational narratives of Genesis are not mere myths, but should be understood as divinely inspired, historically accurate accounts of our true origins and early history. My research specifically focuses on how this biblical framework provides explanations for 5 interconnected areas: our shared human genetics, human global dispersion, our languages, our cultures, and our technological advancement as a species. We will explore the evidence of our common ancestry and how pivotal biblical events, such as the global flood, acted as a genetic bottleneck, and the division at Babel leading to isolated populations, and how they profoundly influenced the genetic diversity observed worldwide today. Furthermore, we will investigate how the biblical narrative accounts for the remarkably swift spread of distinct people groups across Earth, following these historical events. I'll address how the Babel narrative provides a direct explanation for the sudden appearance of distinct language families and the subsequent diversification of cultures. And finally, we'll consider the biblical view of humanity, created with intelligence from the start, and how it explains the rapid development of technology and the complex civilizations early in human history. Now, it's crucial to say up front, the Bible is a vast and profound book, supporting truths and offering wisdom far beyond the scope that I will be discussing in this thesis here today. My thesis specifically concentrates on how the historical events recorded in early Genesis, creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel, and they just provide a coherent and scientifically plausible explanation for these particular aspects of human origins and development. As we delve into the details, my aim is to demonstrate that the Bible offers not just a faith based on abstract belief, but a faith grounded in historical reality, providing a robust understanding of our shared past and ultimately a confident hope for our future. Let's start by looking at our genetic makeup, our DNA. Genesis 1 through 3 clearly states that humanity began with one couple, Adam and Eve, created by God, and that everyone who came after them are their descendants. Genesis 5 gives us some of these early family lines. My research shows that this fits with scientific findings that point to common ancestors, often called mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam. These are scientific terms for the most recent female and male ancestors from whom everyone alive inherited some genetic material. As one researcher noted about the human genetic family tree being relatively shallow, quote, "It's as if we all came from the same small village in Africa not too long ago," unquote. While scientists who don't start with the Bible often interpret these findings as pointing to millions of years, my study suggests that this genetic evidence of common ancestors lines up perfectly with the biblical account of Adam and Eve being the first humans. It's a significant scientific observation that matches the Bible story of a single beginning. Furthermore, the global flood described in Genesis 6 through 9 dramatically reduced human population to just Noah's family, meaning just Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. This event acted as a severe genetic bottleneck. Imagine pouring many different colored marbles through a very narrow opening. Only a limited variety of those marbles will get through to start the collection again. In the same way, this sharp drop in population size, and thus in the variety of genes, significantly shaped the genetic diversity we see today. After the flood, at the Tower of Babel, as described in Genesis 11, God confused the languages and scattered people, as listed in Genesis 10, showing the grandsons and from the different groups coming from Noah. Now, this forced separation into smaller, isolated groups sped up something called genetic drift. This is a term which means random changes in how common certain gene variations are within a population, especially noticeable in small, separated groups. As these groups moved and adapted to different places and conditions, as described in Genesis 8:22 and Genesis 9:1 through 7, unique genetic traits developed. So, the order of events in the Bible: a single created couple with a lot of initial genetic variety, followed by a flood that caused a bottleneck, and then people being separated and scattered after Babel, offers a logical and scientifically understandable way to see the patterns of human genetic variation around the world, fitting within the time frame the Bible suggests. It explains how a small starting population could quickly become diverse and spread out and adapt. Next, let's think about the remarkable variety of languages and cultures across the globe. Genesis 11 gives us a direct explanation: the Tower of Babel. Before this event, everyone shared one language, which helped unify a single culture. Their rebellion against God led to his direct action. God miraculously confused their languages so that they could no longer understand each other, as it describes in Genesis 11, 7 through 9. This was a supernatural act, not a slow, natural process. This forced them to scatter across the earth as God had originally intended. While scientists who study language often propose that languages slowly changed over very long periods, my research suggests that the sudden appearance of language families that are fundamentally different and don't seem related all points more directly to a single historical event like Babel. The deep differences in structure and vocabulary between major language families, such as Indo-European families, which describe English and Spanish, and Sino-Tibetan families, which describe Mandarin Chinese, and how these just don't easily fit into a model of slow change over immense periods of time, without a clear sign of how they gradually split. The Babel story, as a direct act of God, offers a clear explanation for this first rapid split into completely different language groups. The slower changes that happen within these established language families, like how languages within the Romance family evolved from Latin, are indeed what linguistics study. To further explain this point, if we look at the hypothesis of evolution, there's two major parts. There's macroevolution and there's microevolution. Microevolution describes when an animal within a given family alters itself through genetic variation and mutations to stay within that same family, but causing slight changes in their anatomy. And this describes like all the different variations of dogs, all coming from one single ancestor. But macroevolution, something that's not proven, is distinct changes from a family to another family, meaning like something simple like a lizard becoming a dinosaur specifically. Now, if we apply that same framework to linguistics, we can look at it like this. The macroevolution of language came when God supernaturally separated populations and languages across the earth, creating these major new families of language. What came secondary through the next following years was the microevolution, the slight changes and variations that happened afterwards. And that is indeed what linguistics study. Beyond language, the Bible describes many times people migrated after Babel. Genesis 10 and the Abraham's journey from Ur in chapter 12, the Exodus from Egypt. There's so many different stories in the Bible and accounts in the Bible that describe this. And these accounts show how cultural practices, skills, and beliefs spread and changed as these groups, now speaking different languages, settled in new areas and developed separately across the earth. The Bible's focus on family lines, as described in Genesis 12 through 50 and 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, show how families and tribes were organized. And it also shows this in Numbers 1 through 2. And the importance of passing down knowledge and values. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9 also highlights how cultures were kept and passed down within these new populations, creating a rich variety of cultures that we see today. The Tower of Babel narrative in Genesis 11 explains the rapid diversification of languages and the dispersal of people as a result of divine intervention. This contrasts with the gradual language evolutionary theories and provides a framework for the initial emergence of distinct language families. Post-Babel biblical accounts detail migrations and genealogies, illustrating the spread and adaptation of cultures and beliefs with these new language groups, which ultimately shaped our world's linguistic and cultural diversity. Finally, let's consider how remarkably fast human technology and civilizations have advanced throughout history. When compared to the idea of humans evolving slowly over millions of years, this seemed to have happened almost overnight, in a blink of an eye. And I believe the Bible provides a clear explanation for this accelerated development. First, Genesis 1:27 states that humans were created in God's image. This means God gave us the inherent ability to think, be creative, and solve problems right from the moment of creation. Reflecting our divine creator's nature, rather than slowly gaining these abilities over millions of years through Darwinian evolution. The early chapters of Genesis, like chapter 4, record surprisingly advanced skills appearing early in human history, including building cities, developing musical instruments, and the working of metals. These were not the simple beginnings of a slowly evolving species. They were clear signs of God-given intelligence and technological ability. Second, the Bible indicates that when sin entered the world, the curse, in Genesis chapter 3, life became much harder, requiring hard work and cleverness to survive, as described in Genesis 3:17 through 19. Now, this challenge within God's plan acted as a driving force for innovation and the development of tools and techniques to overcome the difficulties of a world changed by sin. Third, my research suggests that a significant amount of technological knowledge likely existed in the world after the global flood. The survival of Noah and his family through this worldwide cataclysm, a sudden violent event, the flood, ensured that this knowledge was saved. It was then quickly used again and built upon by intelligent humans in the world after the flood. This helps explain the relatively fast appearance of advanced civilizations with complex technologies like irrigational systems in Mesopotamia, astronomy in Egypt, and writing systems in large buildings relatively soon after the time of the flood. Without needing these vast ages of slow development, sites like the Göbekli Tepe, which are often dated very old by secular methods, could, within this biblical framework, be seen as sophisticated buildings by early post-flood people using this saved knowledge. This shows intelligent people applying what they knew and passing that knowledge down through generations, as it describes in Deuteronomy 6, fulfilling God's command to take care of the earth, as described in Genesis 1:28. Therefore, the Bible suggests that human progress was rapid. We were created with inherent intelligence, and challenges from the fall spurred innovation, and knowledge from the pre-flood world was preserved and quickly reapplied. This biblical view explains the seemingly sudden appearance of complex skills and technologies in early history. Having explored how the Bible provides a coherent framework for understanding our genetics, our language, and our cultures and technological development, let's bring these threads together. The time has come to challenge the idea that the Bible's core truths just don't fit with reality. For too long, these powerful, life-giving accounts of history have been pushed aside like myths, seen as less important than what the world calls real facts. If we remember the story I brought up about the struggle Sarah felt, that uneasy gap between her faith and what she learned in her class, it clearly shows how much we need a clearer understanding. My research proves that the early chapters of Genesis aren't fighting against reality. They are explaining it. The Genesis story, from creation through the flood and Babel, gives us the most powerful, the most logical, and the most real way to understand the basics of our world. We've seen how our shared human genes point to everyone coming from one recent single start. This origin was shaped by a big drop in people, the flood, and the fast spreading out after Babel, which is exactly what we observe in science. The amazing variety of human languages appearing suddenly in different groups, instead of changing slowly, strongly points to God's direct action at the Tower of Babel. And the incredibly fast way human technology has grown, which seems strange if people evolve slowly over millions of years, makes perfect sense if the Bible is true, and that humans were made in the image of God, with intelligence built in from the very start. These aren't just simple tales for children. They are the true base on which our shared human story is built. They offer a clear, powerful way to look at science and history. Understanding the Bible this way does much more than just connect faith and reason. It shows us our common beginnings, bringing unity where the world needs it. It confirms that we all have value and potential given to us by our Creator. It gives us not just a way to understand our past, but a strong hope for a future based on true things. Let us move forward, strengthened by this deep understanding, to connect with the world around us, truly knowing, that the Bible offers not just faith, but the truest, most convincing account of our shared story. Thank you.
Great job, Elijah. Your paper was well written. Your presentation was great as well. I appreciated the example of Sarah to kind of give some context as to which, like, why this would be something that would be relevant for us to explore, right? And I want to come back to that idea in a moment. But before we do, so you mentioned that with Sarah, she was told these stories, right? The stories of creation, the stories of the ark, and that's all that they really remain as. And obviously, for your paper and for your presentation, you call for a very literal interpretation of Genesis chapter 1 through 11. But there are those that are in theological circles that don't take a literary approach, that say it's more allegorical, or maybe say, hey, there could be more time, or whatever, right? That they say that they're more so fables to get us to where we are now. How would you approach someone that maybe would push back on you and say, well, Genesis 1 through 11 is not literal? How would you approach that situation?
Well, I'd say each different Bible, book of the Bible has a different interpretation that you can apply to it. Some are more poetic, some are more literal, and I believe Genesis is one of those books that are completely literal. As we see through Genesis 5, it's very clear lineages of people. We see Genesis 1 through 3, it talks about how God created, God did this, very deliberately. Everything in Genesis is very deliberate when it talks about its history, and you have to define it as such. Now, if you take just one part of that, just the genealogies, and say that's true, but not the rest of it, then you're being intellectually dishonest about Genesis. You have to take all of Genesis as true, and you have to understand it and look at it based on what science says and what the Bible as a whole says, because Genesis is the start of the story, and it's not supposed to be a story. It's the account of the whole Bible. It's the start of the Bible.
Fair enough. Now, this question may be a little tangential, but I'm honestly just curious. In your preparation for this thesis, what is one area that you feel like in your research maybe needs more further research? Could it be like biblical history, like genetics, archaeology? Like, what do you feel like as you were researching this? What do you feel like was like the missing piece that you felt like, gosh, if we found this out, we would know this? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe that largely there isn't much against the Bible, and if you look far enough into it, that science can really go against. But if you're talking about areas I could study more in this paper, I believe that it would be more in the archaeology side,
okay.
More into how all these different locations and how they interact with the Bible. Because many people look at a lot of these old civilizations and think of them as being 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old, when really they were only about 4,000 years old.
Sure.
So you have to, that's an area where I definitely would want to do more research, because I do believe there is a lot in that area.
Okay. So this is last question, and it actually came while you were telling Sarah's story. The thing that makes us Christian is that we believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what makes us Christian. And when we're raising children in the church, we teach them that, but we also teach them the stories. And I'm putting that in quotes. And it seems to me what tends to happen, at least in my experience with youth students, with college age students, is that they understand God's grace, but then when they learn the creation stories, the stories in Genesis, that is what makes their faith falter, or make it, as you said, it breaks that the break between this is just a story versus the reality, right? So my question to you is, and I'm putting you really on the spot, so I apologize, but where do we go wrong? How do we approach young people in a way that says, hey, remember what is of first importance, that like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, that Jesus came, he died, and he rose again. How do we use the discipleship moments that we have when we are telling these stories to keep young people grounded in the truth of our faith?
I think the very simple answer is to stop calling them stories, because in all reality, they're accounts of the Bible, historical accounts, and been proven over and over again. So if you separate this account, this history, from the story, then it begins to not be focused on the right thing. People get confused, as you were talking about. And the real issue then is that when they're younger, maybe we can refer to them as stories, but providing a little more. But throughout all of Sunday school and the youth ministry, we need to continuously add more and more to that, and not necessarily refer to them as stories at that point, or refer to them as the actual accounts. And if they have any questions, we need to approach those questions with courage, because the Bible does actually explain this in science. Over 60% of all scientists are Christians. not all those Christians actually uphold the values of Genesis, of a young earth.
Sure.
So if we simply just look at the world and decide to look at this thesis and actually take it literally, the framework of the Bible, when not considered as a story but as a historical account, something that really happened, we can actually end up fostering a better world where we can actually focus on things that are true without focusing on all of our little biases, but focus on the biggest and truest form of the gospel that we know in the world, that being the Bible.
Thank you.
Good job. I like your topic a lot. I'm a big fan fan. That's hard to say. I felt like you kind of started by talking about history and science from a secular perspective and trying to reconcile that with Christian worldview, and then slowly science became the Christian idea a little bit. At least that's how it kind of seems in my head is what happened is we sort of took science and history and then like put them into a biblical worldview, which I thought was pretty cool. I was wondering about this Wednesday, if you could just hear me out. Like it says, this isn't about choosing one idea over the other, but about discovering a potential harmony that speaks to our shared ancestry and unifying threads that bind us all. And I think that's between the biblical worldview and the scientific worldview. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, but you're further on that question?
Well, as soon as I know, then I'll know if I should answer it.
Yeah, so I'm more referring to not everyone's going to come to the gospel. Not everyone believes in Christianity. But using the Bible as a framework, a proven framework, as how we view science is what I'm arguing for.
So do you think that, how do you think we should educate children, and not just at church, but in schools? Do you think they should learn about microevolution? Do you think they should learn from the Bible? Do you think we should learn from both?
So there's a lot of changes that can be made. If everyone suddenly accepted this as the proper framework, then many things would need to change. Because every scientist has its own bias. And the bias of a lot of scientists right now is the theory of Darwinian evolution. They take some things that are true, like microevolution that we can observe, and add in things that are not true, and macroevolution, which is not proven. So we won't necessarily change how we teach students. It's on a case-by-case basis, and it's not something that, like, you would hope that they would be learning from the Bible. You'd hope they learned actual science, not just an idea. But in a way, if you look at it, many people argue that the Bible is similar to the theory of evolution. It's just a framework, as I described here, for discussing and learning about history and science. So if we look at in this whole speech, I'm arguing that the Bible is the best explanation, the best framework for the gospel, for science and history. Did that answer the question or not?
Yeah, no, it did. So do you think that so science, what would be your definition of science?
So the definition of science, that would simply just be what is observable in the world of God's creation, how God's creation works, or the study of God's creation.
Yeah. Okay, so science has to be from a biblical perspective. It's not science.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just wondering how we can hold together a science and history from a non-biblical worldview and reconcile the biblical worldview for students who are academics.
I don't believe they are. I believe if you look at each individual area, on this paper, it focuses just on early history, it focuses on genetics, linguistics, and that sort of area. So I'm not going to go super deep into that whole area, but I do believe in each different area of science that the Bible does best explain the world around us.
You guys stole my questions, but I appreciated this paper for a number of reasons. I was Sarah. I mean, I took an anthropology class in college, and I was pretty much fighting. My anthropology professor hated me. I didn't understand. I do think that we do a disservice and don't marry these things together, and it starts to make you feel like you're kind of have the wool pulled over your eyes, as a little kid in Sunday school. So I appreciated it for that. I do think that I'm wondering if do you know anyone that would consider themselves an old earth Christian?
Yes.
You do. Have you had any discussions with them?
In this certain area, I've only had a discussion with one person. It was from Team Pact.
Okay.
About it, and it's simply that they view you wanted me to answer?
Yeah.
They simply just view the 6 days of creation as each being millennia. Each of the days being like a day for God is an eternity to us. Like we don't really know exactly how time works for God, so they use that to define what these days mean. But the Bible, if you actually read it in Genesis, it's clear that that's not what it's meaning.
They're reading the Bible too, though. But so then I'm wondering, for an old earth Christian, if we could just label them that, does this fall flat, your paper, or would you say it still can fit into that framework?
Are you saying, can this fit into the framework of a Christian who believes in evolution?
Yes.
No.
No. Okay. So you're speaking strictly to young earth Christians who believe in a literal 7-day account of Genesis. Okay. So then how would you like to see, this is kind of your question, but how would you like to see things change as far as education or museums or in any ways that history is reflected or ancient history is reflected in these different areas of paleontology, whatever, linguistics? How would you like to see it change? Like, would you want it to be also reflecting this theory as well? Or would you want multiple ones? I just want to know how dogmatic you are about it. That's all.
These are a couple homeschool moms asking me about education. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so I believe this thesis can only be correct if you look at it from a young earth perspective. And I believe that when you look at all these different areas where people teach about evolution, it's just another idea. It's another framework for looking at things. It's just not a biblical one. And I believe the biblical version is actually superior than the atheistic Darwinian evolution.
Sure.
Now, to fully answer that, there's many areas that could just change. It's simply just looking at everything as happening a little bit faster. Because most historians agree that a lot of these sites happen within a couple of thousand years from each other. But as you look deeper into things, certain things like the Egyptians, their actual length and their civilization can actually be found if you look at the Bible. And it's actually much shorter than you actually recognize beforehand. And certain sites, like I brought up the Göbekli Tepe, it's the oldest ancient building ever to be found, or that scientists say to be found. And it has animals and birds all over it, even animals and birds that aren't native to Turkey, where it is found. And many believe that to be the altar god that Noah created to the Lord after the flood. And when you look at that, like certain little, it's all by case basis. But when you look at something like that, atheists define that structure as being over 10,000 years old, when in reality, under this framework, it is about 4,000 years old. So it's simply just looking at each individual thing and slightly altering it. Because they've made it so that it has to fit into their narrative, but they couldn't make it fit into their narrative because the span of human civilization has been so short. So they decided to just lightly lengthen it past the 6,000 years, which is not something that's accurate, and actually can be condensed without causing any contradictions in the texts and in science.
Okay. I appreciated that you explained the difference between micro and macro evolution